What if your soul is just a collection of neurons firing in your brain? It's a bold question, one that challenges everything we've believed about the essence of who we are. The soul has been central to human thought for millennia, but what if it's not the mystical, immaterial force we've imagined, but simply the product of biology? What if your soul is just a collection of neurons firing in your brain? Is it an ethereal entity, a ghost in the machine, separate from our physical bodies? Could it be a bridge between the physical and the metaphysical, a link to something greater than ourselves? The soul, a concept that spans religion, philosophy and spirituality. But now neuroscience is throwing a curveball into this age-old debate. Could our very sense of self, our thoughts, memories and consciousness be nothing more than electrical impulses and chemical reactions in the brain? Today we're diving into the fascinating intersection of science and spirituality, exploring whether your soul might just be neurons in action. One of the greatest mysteries in science and philosophy is consciousness. Where does it come from? What is it that makes us us? If you break down the question, it boils down to this. Are we simply the sum of our neurological processes, or is there something more? A deeper essence, a soul that defines who we are? Some argue that consciousness is an emergent property of the brain's complex network of neurons. Others argue that consciousness is non-physical, something beyond the brain entirely. The question is, does your identity reside in your biology, or is there something greater that defines you beyond the brain's activity? For centuries, philosophers and theologians have debated the nature of the soul. From ancient Greece to modern times, the question of what makes us truly human has been a topic of endless discussion and contemplation. Is it immortal, surviving our physical death? Does it journey to an afterlife, or does it transform into something new? Or does it simply cease to exist when our brain shuts down? Is the end of our physical life also the end of our soul's journey? These are questions that have no easy answers, but exploring them can lead us on a fascinating journey into the heart of what makes us human. It is a quest that challenges our understanding and pushes the boundaries of our knowledge. The debate about the soul's nature often boils down to two opposing philosophical camps, dualism and materialism. Dualism, championed by philosophers like René Descartes, posits that the mind and body are distinct entities. The soul, in this view, is non-physical and exists independently of the brain. Materialism, on the other hand, argues that everything in the universe, including the mind and consciousness, arises from physical matter and its interactions. In this view, the soul is not a separate entity, but rather an emergent property of the brain, much like consciousness itself. Now let's break down the two major theories, dualism and materialism, that attempt to explain consciousness and how they relate to the concept of the soul. Dualism is the belief that the mind and body are separate entities. The idea, famously championed by philosopher René Descartes, posits that the soul or mind exists outside the physical brain and interacts with the body. In this view, consciousness is something non-physical, and the brain merely acts as the vessel for this immaterial soul. The soul, in dualism, is often seen as the source of our self-awareness, free will, and eternal essence. But dualism faces criticism, primarily because there's no clear mechanism explaining how an immaterial soul could interact with a material body. If the mind is separate, how does it affect the brain's biological functions and vice versa? Moreover, scientific evidence has shown that specific areas of the brain correlate with particular thoughts, memories, and actions, making it harder to argue that consciousness exists independently from the brain. Enter materialism, which takes the opposite approach. Materialists argue that everything, including consciousness, arises from the brain's physical processes. This theory holds that the mind is not separate from the brain, it's an emergent property of it. In other words, our thoughts, feelings, and experiences are simply the result of neurons firing and complex chemical interactions. In this view, there is no need for an immaterial soul. Your sense of self, your consciousness exists because of your brain's structure and function. Memory, identity, emotion, all of it is rooted in the biology of the brain. The soul, perhaps it's simply a concept, an illusion, created by the brain's complex processes. If the soul were truly independent of the brain, wouldn't we expect it to remain unaffected by such injuries? This raises important questions about the nature of consciousness and the mind-body connection. Yet the evidence suggests otherwise. The intricate dance of neurons firing and connecting seems to be at the very heart of our thoughts, emotions, and sense of self. Now, think about the implications of this. If materialism is true, what happens to the idea of the soul? Could it be that the feeling of a transcendent self, the very notion of a soul, is simply a byproduct of neural activity? Does that mean your consciousness could be completely wiped out with enough damage to your brain? Another most compelling argument for the materialist view comes from studies of brain injuries and neurological disorders. For example, individuals who have experienced damage to the prefrontal cortex, responsible for decision-making, personality, and social behavior, often exhibit dramatic changes in personality. If the brain is damaged, the self can change drastically. Some studies even show that entire memories can be erased through brain injury, suggesting that our identity is directly tied to the brain's physical state. Now let's put this into perspective. What happens when we look at how the brain works in extreme cases? One striking example comes from the world of neurology, patients who have had their entire hemispheres of the brain removed. These rare cases are known as hemispherectomies. In some instances, people who undergo these procedures are able to live relatively normal lives with personality and memory largely intact, despite the drastic loss of brain matter. This phenomenon suggests that the brain has an incredible ability to reorganize itself, but if the soul is truly a separate immaterial entity, could it survive such a radical alteration to the brain? The materialist view holds that the brain is the source of your consciousness. If parts of the brain can be removed and the self can still persist, perhaps that doesn't point to the existence of an immaterial soul, but rather to the remarkable adaptability and complexity of the brain itself. On the other hand, these stories of adaptation could also be seen as evidence that the brain holds more than just our thoughts and memories. It might play a role in shaping our essence as human beings, our soul, in a very real, physical sense. If this is true, then the idea of a soul may not be some ethereal external force, but an emergent property of neural networks interacting in incredibly complex ways. This brings us to a fascinating question. If our personality and sense of self are products of our brain activity, what happens when that activity is altered? Consider the effects of psychoactive drugs, for example. Substances like LSD and psilocybin can profoundly alter our perceptions, thoughts, and even our sense of self. And it gets even more interesting. In recent years, experiments on brainwaves and consciousness have revealed that even the smallest changes in brain chemistry can dramatically alter consciousness. Take the use of psychedelics, for example. Drugs like psilocybin, found in magic mushrooms, and DMT can alter brain function and produce profound experiences that many interpret as spiritual or even encounters with a higher consciousness. But these experiences, while deeply meaningful to the individuals who have them, can be explained by changes in brain activity. In essence, these altered states of consciousness might not be evidence of a soul, but rather proof of the brain's incredible capacity to create a sense of self and otherworldly experiences. These changes, while temporary, highlight the powerful connection between brain chemistry and our subjective experience. If a simple chemical can so drastically alter who we perceive ourselves to be, doesn't it suggest that our self is intimately tied to the material world, not separate from it? So where does this leave us? The question of whether your soul is made of neurons challenges the traditional boundaries between science and spirituality. What we've learned is that while the brain undoubtedly plays a crucial role in shaping consciousness and identity, the relationship between neurons and the soul remains a mystery. The more we explore, the more we realize just how complex and interconnected our sense of self truly is. So, what do you think? Is the soul just a byproduct of the brain, or is there something more to it? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're fascinated by this intersection of science and spirituality, let me know what other topics you'd like to explore next. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to stay updated on future videos. Until next time.